Hi everybody, I'm just about to start my journey to New Hampshire. I just left work a little while ago. It's around 3 o'clock on a beautiful, sunny, mild Wednesday afternoon here in Charlottetown. And I'm going to drive the first leg of the trip, which will be from here in Charlottetown across the Confederation Bridge into New Brunswick. And then I'll be stopping in Moncton for a quick bite to eat. And then onward to Fredericton, where I'll be spending the night before pushing off to New Hampshire first thing on Thursday morning. Very happy to get the news earlier today that they reopened the Trans-Canada Highway between Moncton and Fredericton. There was water on the road from our spring flooding. Same thing happened last year. The road was closed for about a week. Now it's open again. We'll be able to drive through. I think the speed limit is down a bit. It might even be down to 1 lane, but even that is way better than having to go through St. John, which was going to be about a 50 or 60 mile detour to go around the flood zone. So that's no longer necessary. We can go straight through, albeit probably carefully tiptoeing through the flood area. Maybe I'll grab some video of that as I'm going through, because you'll still see some pretty high water along the main highway. So off we go to New Hampshire. Blocks from my building. And when I'm here, I can park for free because I'm in a spot that does not require parking meters or any exchange of money. I can just go. So I'm in much better financial shape at the end of a week. I used to pay for underground parking at my office building, and the price went up crazy high, and I just said the heck with it. And so I stopped parking underground and in the fancy building. I miss it in the wintertime because you have a nice warm vehicle in the basement that you can go to, but it wasn't worth the money. So I said, no, I'm not gonna do it. Anyway, so we're making our way outside the city of Charlottetown now. I have a dash cam as well. Maybe I can paste some of that video in from the dash cam. I'm just leaving, unfortunately, just leaving at the same time as school is getting out. So there may be some school buses I will have to wait for, which is fine. That's part of the deal. I'm not in any great rush to get to Fredericton. I have an Airbnb tonight, and the Airbnb lady emailed me earlier today and wondered if I would be arriving really early, because typically check-in time at an Airbnb is as early as 3 in the afternoon. But in her case, she wanted a little more time to get the room ready because she's working today. So she asked if I was really coming in later on. Like I said, I was probably going to, like about 8 p.m. And she said if I was, that would be great, because she would rather work the rest of the day and then make the room up. So I said, absolutely, I won't be there before 8 o'clock. I'm not even leaving Charlottetown till 3, which is really what it is now, 3:15. So I'm not in a rush, because the later I get there, the happier she is, and she'll have had maximum time to get the room ready for me. It's a little apartment in the basement of a house. I've not stayed there before, but the reviews are excellent, and looking forward to staying there. Airbnb is something that I've come to do the last couple of years, and I'm very happy with it so far. They've not all been perfect, but I think they've all been as advertised. Airbnb is, you get a variety of things, but every person, if they're honest about their accommodations as to whether they have a TV or not, or whether they have a coffee machine or a kitchen, as long as they're telling the truth, and you can read that before you sign up, you're good. And in my case, very happy with the places we've stayed at so far. So, that's the launching of the trip. I'll pick up some video and maybe some B-roll and things as we get onward. So we finally made it out of town. A lot of traffic in Charlottetown today, just as I predicted. There was a whole fleet of school buses that were in the way, and there was a disabled traffic light, which didn't help either. So we're now finally in rural PEI. One of my preferences when I drive off the island is not to take the regular Trans-Canada route, but rather to take a backcountry route that actually saves just a little bit of time. Sorry for the shaky camera here, the roads aren't the best. I'll try to stabilize it a little bit with my hand, but Yeah, the back road is nice. You don't have to go very fast because you make up the time quite nicely just by the fact you're taking a bit of a straighter line route. So it's pretty good that way. Very shortly we'll be crossing the Confederation Bridge. What I plan to do for that crossing is have the camera on facing, starting at the toll booths, I guess, and all the way across the bridge to the New Brunswick side. For those of you who have never heard of the Confederation Bridge and certainly never driven across it, it's quite a thing. It's a 13-kilometer or about a 9-mile bridge. It is one of the longest bridges, I think actually still the longest bridge on the planet, that goes over water that occasionally freezes, if that makes any sense. It goes over water that freezes in the wintertime. And that's what often happens here in PEI. We have water that freezes in the wintertime, and it becomes a pack of ice underneath the bridge. So the bridge is quite an enduring marvel. It's a little over 20 years old now. It costs quite a bit to get across. If you leave PEI, you pay. If you come back to PEI, you don't pay. So essentially, you're paying the full price of the bridge, but only in one direction, because almost everybody who comes over to PEI at some point leaves again, at least on a trip, if not permanently on their vacation. So we get their money one way or the other. We being, I guess, the company that built the bridge in a partnership with the Canadian federal government called Straight Crossing Incorporated. The bridge is one lane in each direction, and it has lots of little weather whirligigs and anemometers and wind direction indicators all the way across the bridge. There are video cameras that you can log on to and look to see how things are going on the bridge. It's usually open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Oftentimes, though, when the wind is too high, the bridge will be closed to high-sided vehicles like trucks and buses, anything towing a trailer, and also motorcycles, which are more affected by the wind. But it usually remains open to SUVs and regular passenger cars, even when it's at its worst. There have been a few occasions, though, where the bridge has been closed altogether for all vehicles because it just wasn't safe to go across. And they are pretty rare. Maybe a couple of times a year for a few hours the bridge might be closed altogether. So it's not a bad deal at all. Prior to the bridge being built in the 1990s, the only way on and off PEI was by ferry. The bridge takes a pathway that's very close to the original ferry route from Borden, PEI to Cape Tormentine, New Brunswick. There is also another ferry that still runs from PEI to Nova Scotia, and that's Northumberland Ferries, and it goes from Wood Islands over to Caribou, Nova Scotia. And that's a significantly different direction for people this time of year. The ferry service starts off on the 1st of May, so today is actually the first day of the ferry going from Wood Islands over to Caribou. And it'll run until late December, usually just before Christmas when they pack it up. And they don't run through the wintertime. At that point, the bridge becomes the only way on and off PEI, which is not a bad deal, except it's about 45 or 46 something dollars Canadian each time you leave the island in a car. And it's a lot more than that if you leave the island in a larger vehicle like a truck or a big RV or something like that. Motorcycles are cheaper, and even pedestrians can get across. You have you make arrangements, and Straight Crossing has vans that go back and forth from one side of the bridge to the other. So if you have somebody who's willing to drop you off on the PEI side and then pick you up over in the New Brunswick side to continue your journey, if you can arrange that with someone or a couple of people to do that for you, you can get across the bridge fairly cheaply. Once a year, usually in the summertime, maybe around June, I think, they close the bridge for, or maybe it's, I don't know exactly when it is, but they close the bridge to have a sporting event. It's usually a walk, a charity walk. People will walk from one end of the bridge to the other. They'll raise money. They'll get pledges from their friends and family to donate money to the charity, and away they go. So I'm not crazy about that myself, because that's the only way for a lot of people to get on and off PEI, and to have them held up for many, many hours while there was a bit of frolic going on is not my idea of a good business decision, but it is what it is. It's part of living on an island like Prince Edward Island. Confederation Bridge is pretty famous for its shape. The PEI, or Charlottetown Islanders, Quebec Major Junior hockey team, they have a picture of the bridge, or a rendition of the bridge, on their jerseys now, so that's their logo. Bridge is a pretty famous thing. A lot of people come to PEI for the purposes of driving across the bridge, and they just want to see it and do it, and maybe drive underneath it, take some pictures, whatever. We won't have time to do that, but Neil has done some nice photography around the bridge in both summer and winter. And in my case, my trip is essentially a straight line, so I won't be doing any bridge photography other than what you'll see from being on the bridge. So, as you can see, it's a beautiful structure, and it certainly has made life a lot easier for the people of PEI, who in the past had to endure over an hour each way on the ferry. And of course, the ferries only go at a certain number of times per day. So if you were trying to make an appointment on the mainland, you had to factor in bridge wait time, plus your driving time, plus the possibility that when you arrived at the ferry, it might be full, and you might have to wait for the next one 2 hours later or something like that. So nowadays, you just get on one end of the bridge, 10 minutes later you get off the other end, so it's pretty good. The speed limit on the bridge is 80 kilometers an hour, which translates to 50 miles an hour. When there's heavy wind, they still will allow small cars and SUVs across, but they'll reduce the speed limit down to 60 kilometers an hour, which translates to between 35 and 40 miles an hour, about 35 or 37. So that becomes the speed limit when things get a little dicey. And I've been across the bridge a few times when it's hairy like that, including a trip I made just last week. So even at a slower speed though, you're still doing way better than you would if you were having to wait for a ferry and get on board. And there's a romantic piece to the ferry business, I guess, so it's okay once in a while, but of course those of us who really love the ferry, at least from the 1st of May until late December, we still have that option. We take our vehicle to a different part of the island where the ferry docks, and then we get off on the Nova Scotia side. The bridge, it actually connects PEI with a different province, the province of New Brunswick. And depending, if it's the summertime and you are going from, let's say, anywhere in eastern PEI to Halifax, Nova Scotia, you would want to take the ferry because it's actually a shorter trip. Even with the slower passage of the ferry across the water, you're saving a lot of miles and you're saving a lot of fuel by taking the ferry. However, if you're living in even Charlottetown or Summerside, and you're going to Moncton, New Brunswick, or Montreal, or Boston, or somewhere, you're certainly going to want to take the bridge. It's going to be a lot faster than taking the ferry. So we crossed the bridge and we're now on the New Brunswick side. Hope you enjoyed that little crossing. You'll notice that when we got to the New Brunswick side of the bridge, you had the Welcome to New Brunswick sign, but then an even bigger and more prominent sign was this huge picture of a moose to warn motorists coming off of PEI that they're to watch out for wildlife as big as a moose, and a moose is a pretty darn big critter. The reason that that sign is there, well, not only one reason obviously is because there's moose around, but number two is to remind people from PEI who've been driving on PEI for weeks or maybe all their lives that this is New Brunswick, and you're going to see different things in New Brunswick than you'll see in PEI, because being an island, there are certain animals that PEI just doesn't have. There are no black bears, no moose, no deer, no cougars, those kinds of mainland wildlife creatures that are large in size, if you can't walk across the ice in the wintertime safely, then it's not on PEI. We don't have any skunks in PEI. No, sorry, we do have skunks. We don't have any porcupines. There are no porcupines in PEI. We have skunks, we have raccoons, we have some muskrats, lots of birds, obviously. They can get to the island, no problem. But as far as furry friends, nothing very big is on PEI. So if you live there all your life or live there for many years, you're not really programmed to be looking in the ditches and in between the trees on the highways for large animals, large enough that could hurt your car or hurt you if you hit them. So when you get off the bridge, there's this big sign that says, "You're back in moose country, watch out for moose." There have been several very bad accidents along that stretch of road where people just come off the bridge, or back in the day would have come off the ferry, which docked nearby, and hit a moose. They're very hard to see at night. At least with some animals like cats and deer, their eyes will reflect the headlights at night, but a moose's eyes don't. And a moose is a very dark creature. If it's nighttime, there's a bit of rain, or the road is shiny and wet, you could have a moose very close to you and not even see him. I had a close encounter with a moose probably 30 years ago in central New Brunswick, and it was a rainy night, about halfway between Fredericton and where I lived in Doketown, and I just had this sense that I should look that way. It was 10 or 11 o'clock at night in the March or April. It was really very dark and rainy, and I saw the face of the moose go by my side window. Probably was no more than 3 or 4 feet away from the car, and the moose was pointed towards the center of the road. So had I been even 2 seconds later, I may have hit that moose, and I may have hurt myself. Certainly would have hurt the moose. I have hit a deer. I hit and killed a deer, not on purpose, of course, near Chipman, New Brunswick. It just darted out in front of me, and I had no time to get out of its way. And at some point, when you're driving and there's wildlife around, you have to decide what's more important, your life or the animal's life. Some people have caused very bad accidents for themselves by swerving to avoid a raccoon, or swerving to avoid a porcupine or something. And they end up in the ditch and hitting a culvert or a tree or worse. So sometimes when you see the animal, not only do you not have a whole lot of time to react, but even if you do, your best course of action may be to just keep driving straight and take the chance that the hit of the animal is going to be less catastrophic than trying to avoid the animal. So anyway, that's nothing that other mainlanders don't already know, but coming from PEI, it's good to have that moose reminder. What I'm doing now is I'm driving along the 955. The bridge comes off as part of the Trans-Canada and goes to a fairly large but old traffic circle in a place called Port Elgin, and it then splits off in 3 places depending where you want to go. If you get off at 90 degrees, you come this way towards Moncton. If you go straight around, in other words halfway around the circle and keep on straight, you end up going towards Olac, which then allows you to head for Nova Scotia. And if you go around 270 degrees in the roundabout, you get right into Port Elgin itself, which is a small village here in New Brunswick. What I like to do is avoid that traffic circle, because there are usually lots of cars and trucks on the road. It's a bit busy. Plus you get stuck behind lots of traffic, there's nowhere to pass. So here on this 955 route, it goes through Murray Corner and a little bit of Chemagoué, and it's just a nice rural, fairly low speed but very nice and clean 2-lane road, and it's low blood pressure for me. I like driving with low blood pressure. I don't want people around me. I like to just go tootle along at my own speed, and I'm very content to drive on a road like this, especially if I know I'm not losing ground, because I always will come out and rejoin the road ahead of where I would have been had I stayed on the Trans-Canada and gone a slightly longer route. There is some construction on this road from time to time, and it's a little rough at the other end of it, but it's it's really nice. And I will point the camera out the window here so you can see how close we are to Northumberland Strait. There are beaches and campsites and parks all along here, and it's quite lovely. In the summertime, it's a very attractive place for people to spend their weekends and do some of their holidays and vacations. It's very quiet. We're just going by really the only store in the area, and you can go there and get a newspaper maybe, and that's and a little bit of gas, and that's about it. Otherwise, it's just a lovely little stretch of road, and if you're on a long trip, it's nice to have just a little relaxation from time to time. Hey folks, I'm back. Drove through Moncton, now on the 4-lane highway, divided highway, so pretty happy about that. Stopped for a little bit of supper, Neil knows where. I stop at the same place all the time. And now making my way to River Glade on the Trans-Canada Highway here. River Glade is the place where the highway splits, and one branch of it goes on to Fredericton, off to the right. The other branch to the left goes to St. John and what they call the port city. Not my favorite place to drive or to be. It's kind of, well, no offense to people from St. John, but it's not a super duper spot. A little grimy, a little rough around the edges. Not my style. I'm too classy for that. Just kidding. And now, up until earlier today, until about 12:30 this afternoon, all traffic coming to that split had to go to St. John because the road to Fredericton was blocked due to flooding. They just reopened at 12:33 this afternoon, reopened that little stretch of highway along where the water is close to the road. They inspected the highway to make sure there were no debris, or the road itself wasn't undermined by erosion or anything like that. So they've got the road inspected. I hear on the radio that it's down to 1 lane of traffic, and I mentioned that earlier, and the speed limit's only about 45 miles an hour, 70 kilometers an hour, so that will be still better than taking a long detour of an extra hour to get around the city of St. John, through it and then around the other side of it. So as we get closer to the area that had the flooding, I will turn the camera forward so you can see what the road looks like and see maybe some of the aftermath of the flooding. It made national news here in Canada. It's pretty well coast to coast. There was interest in what is happening not only here in New Brunswick, but there's other flooding taking place in Quebec and somewhat in Ontario and the Ottawa area, as well as all around the island of Montreal and Lake of Two Mountains. So flooding's been bad this year. The snow melt happened pretty fast, and those areas that still had snow in the woods, when the warmer weather and the rain came, it all washed it down in one big shot, and it caused quite a bit of damage to homes, properties, and did considerable disruption to travel. So today is really the first day in about a week that this road is open. So I had my fingers crossed the last couple of days that as the water started to recede, that it might get down far enough they'll open the highway, and they did. So it's not all about me, but I'll take it. So shortly we'll be going to River Glade. You'll probably see some vestiges of the barricade, but now we're going to be allowed through it to go on to Fredericton on the Trans-Canada. We've now passed Salisbury, traveling under the old Trans-Canada on the what we now call the new Trans-Canada, although it's about 20 years old. Some stretches of it are older than that. This is River Glade coming up. This is the interchange that gives us our split between Fredericton and Moncton and St. John. They meet together and fan out in 3 different directions. We're inbound from Moncton to the split, and we'll be keeping right to go to Fredericton in the next mile and a half or so. So I'm looking to see if there are going to be any signs of pylons or barricades or those orange barrels or anything like that left over. Well, there's some orange barrels coming up right now. So earlier today, these barrels were essentially on the road, directing everybody into the left lane so they could continue on to St. John. And several vehicles ahead of me here are still going to St. John for reasons of their own that I can't fathom. And we're going to press on for Fredericton here, and we're going to stay on the right-hand side. So around the corner here will tell us if we have a lot of infrastructure still remaining or whether they've tidied all that up already. Trundling along there. A few barrels. Looks like things have largely been moved. I haven't seen any flashing signs or anything, so looks like life is going to be back to normal here on Highway 2. We're now coming up on, oops, just the camera took a little tilt. We're going to be coming up on a community called Petitcodiac, where I have some relatives. Spent many summers here as a younger man, teenager, hanging out with my cousins, having a great time. It's a great community, still is. Petitcodiac gives way to Havelock and then eventually Coles Island and onward towards Fredericton. So we're now just past the point where St. John traffic would merge onto here if it was desiring to go to Fredericton. So it's all looking good. We'll be back on when we get closer to the flood zone, see what it looks like. Okay, we're passing Mill Cove now. It's a little bit later in the evening. It's coming up on 7 p.m. We're about 45 minutes out of Fredericton, or a little bit less. And this is where the road starts to descend down to the St. John River Basin. And this is where, of course, the water rising was the reason why the road itself was completely shut off from the River Glade exit all the way past Oromocto. So it'll be another couple of miles here before we start seeing anything. But as you can see, traffic is fairly light on the highway. And I'm surprised that the grass isn't greener over in PEI, which doesn't have as mild temperatures. We had less snow and less brutal cold winter kill on our grass, so there's a lot of green already in PEI, and some of the buds are coming out on the trees. But here in New Brunswick, things seem to be a little behind, even though the temperature is actually warmer right now than it was when I left. Right now we're in the low 50s Fahrenheit, and it was in the mid to high 50s here earlier today. So New Brunswick's a little behind the 8 ball, and usually lags New England by 2 to 2.5 weeks when it comes to springing, and also it leads New England or precedes it when it comes to the colors changing in the fall. New Brunswick usually starts to see fall foliage colors early to mid-October, and then it peaks before the end of the month, whereas in New England it's really a little bit later than that as a rule. So I don't know if I'll be able to get by these trucks before they slow down or not, but here's hoping. I want a good view of the river as we drive through it. I don't want to be looking at the back of a couple of Day and Ross trucks, so we're making pretty good time right at the moment. I think we'll get by them. In the RAV, this is a new vehicle for me, and I'm using radar cruise control, so it's pretty cool. Anyway, topping the next hill and then starting to head down into the floody area, which will last for several miles. This road parallels the river for a couple of miles, and that's the part of it that had to be closed off. And there's two very large bridges as well that we have to traverse. First the Jemseg Narrows and then the St. John River itself. And well, there's a bit of a history to this highway. Back when they were planning it, I was a member of the New Brunswick legislature representing an area in central New Brunswick, and I wanted the highway to come through central New Brunswick and not dip all the way south in towards Fredericton, partly because I was greedy and I wanted the construction jobs and the commerce advantages of having a nice divided highway, but also partly because I didn't want the extra expense of building a highway near so many wide river areas and requiring so much bridge work and expensive infrastructure to make this thing work. So we've now hit the lower speed limit already as we get ready for the Gemseg exit. Construction zone announcement, guys with their shovels. And this is the narrowing to one lane, being the left lane in this case. And the speed limit will eventually drop. Here it comes now down to 70, which for our American viewers might be closer related to about 45 miles an hour. So I'm going to drop it down almost to 70. I won't be quite there. And of course our signs are in English and Francais aussi. Reduce speed. And now we've got the pylons. So we're first going to go over the Gemseg Narrows. This is the first of the two bridges I was telling you about. And we're still on fairly high ground, but once we get to the other side, we drop quite quickly, and you'll see, although the river is actually going to be on our left, you're going to see a lot of water on our right, because it's the farmers' fields and marshland on the right that really fills up when there's a flood like this. And even when it's not a bad flood, even when it's a normal flood, if you can call it that, in the spring, there's usually a lot of water in the low-lying marshland and fields that you'll see coming up on the right-hand side as we descend. A pretty good view coming up. I don't know if the camera will get it as good as I can see it, but as we turn into the sun more so, we're starting to make the turn now to the west, and you can see probably over the cement barrier on the right, the guardrail, if you want to call it that, the trees are all totally immersed in water, and we're now coming down to what looks like almost a causeway right now. Believe it or not, the area to the right is usually dry land. The area to the left is usually river, although the river is a lot closer than it usually is. You see all those trees on the left and some of these trees sticking out of the flooded area on the right, and that's clearly not usual, that's not normal. So we're going along at the new posted speed of, well, I'm pushing it a little bit more than the 75, and everybody seems to be behaving themselves quite nicely. More moose signs. That's another thing you have to worry about in floods. Moose and other water creatures, or other land creatures, floodwaters will push them up onto dry surfaces. And sometimes that means the road. So you will see wildlife on the road during flood situations like this. So you have to be a little extra vigilant when it comes to flooding. Now you can see just across the guardrail there, you'll see the water is literally only a foot or two below the edge of the road. And this time yesterday, or maybe the day before, the water would have covered the road completely. This was the area that is now closed. They had to plow off the debris, anything that was left here by the rushing water, pieces of wood, driftwood, other home debris, for instance, would have to be cleaned off before they felt safe enough to open this road. You'll see even in the median, in between the two directions of travel, in the shallow spot, it's also flooded. So it'll take the water several days to get out of this situation. So it's fairly well behaved, though. Everybody who's driving here, although they're reduced to 70 from the usual 110, or about 70 miles an hour, they're quite happy to have this pathway instead of having to go through St. John. You can be darn sure of that. So they'll take a few miles of 45 miles an hour if this gets them through the open highway. So the other lane is dry by the look of things, of course, but because the water could rise again at any minute, they've got it blocked off, because when it does rise, it'll rise in that area first. Pardon me. Now my intention is to take an exit up ahead here in a place called Sheffield. And that will take me along the St. John River to the north side of the city of Fredericton, where I'm staying for the night. But oftentimes, even when the Trans-Canada Highway is fully open, at this time of the year they will close the Sheffield exit, because further along here, the road gets a little bit lower after the exit for Sheffield, while the main Trans-Canada crosses the St. John River with the second set of big bridges, and then after that there's no more flood issue because you're on the higher ground on the other side of the river. So we're going to see if the Sheffield exit is open, and if it is, I plan to take it. So here comes the exit sign. I don't see anything flashing, so I'm going to, I see a lot of barrels though. I'm not sure what's going to take place here. They don't say the exit is, oh yeah they do, the exit is closed. Okay, no Sheffield for me, so that's fine. The road is blocked off to Sheffield. You can see the barricade there, but now we're also getting back to our 110 speed, so I can't take the Sheffield exit and show you some really impressive flooding, because obviously the water is still over the road, and actually I can see the water over the road as I'm driving right now across the bridge over the St. John River. So that's where we're at. And now we're coming across the St. John River back to our high-speed regular routine. There is still some flooding on this side, but not for long because the ground rises pretty rapidly. So there we have it. We've just made it through the area that was detoured up until about 7 hours ago. 7 hours ago that was closed, so got very lucky with this trip. And back on to our regular route. There, get rid of some of that stuff. So there's some driftwood and other stuff right up against the approaches of the bridge. Now we're coming up on the on-ramp for the Westmoreland Street Bridge, and the river is very high. And made it to New Hampshire, in Manchester, New Hampshire. Glenn and I are here ready to tackle the ham radio flea market tomorrow, and we're also going down to Salem, New Hampshire to visit a radio supply store called Ham Radio Outlet. Going to do a little bit more shopping, do a few other things. We always make the same trips and stop at the same places every time. And we eat the same places, we eat the same thing. We hang around with the same guys, and really we could have just done this once, maybe 10 years ago, and not have done it again, because we just repeated our lives every 6 months after that, which is a lot of fun. So we're going to have a lot of fun tomorrow. It's now Thursday afternoon, and we just spent probably 7 hours on the road, maybe from Fredericton down to here. So good weather for the most part. A few scattered showers here and there, and but other than that, it was mostly dry pavement and not too much sun. A little chilly, in the high 40s Fahrenheit, basically all the way down. So it was a great trip, and I thought it would be easier to get across the border if I was wearing something with an American theme. Sure enough, I have my U.S. Naval Academy golf shirt on, so thanks to Leslie for that. That might have helped me get into the States. We had a lot more questions this time, didn't we, Glenn? We had, how long are you going to be there? Do you have reservations? When are you coming back? You're coming back in the same vehicle? Well, lots of questions. They're fine. We just answered them all as we normally would, and we were on our way. So it's all good. Anyway, we'll have some great video from the Near Fest and also just some traveling around the Manchester-Salem area here in New Hampshire. Hey folks, one of the things we have to do every time we come down to Manchester is go to what we call the wire store. It's actually the Electronic Surplus Store is the real name of it. And it's located here on the Candia Road in Manchester, New Hampshire. And inside it is chock full of all kinds of doodads, gadgets. We call it the wire store because a lot of what it has is actually wire. Rolls of wire that they sell by the pound. And for anyone who's into ham radio, wanting to build antennas and things like that, there's no question that having lots of wire around to build your antennas with is something you just gotta have. So there it is, the Electronic Surplus Store. Gonna have a look inside and see all the cool stuff they have. One of the things I like best about that store is the signage. They have what they call fondling samples, so rather than you opening a box to see what's inside, they always have one that's already open and hanging there, and that's called the fondling sample. That's the one you can fondle to see if it feels like the thing that you actually want to buy, and it saves them from having to repackage all the stuff that people don't buy after they've taken it out to fondle it. So the signs, I think, in there are the best, but also the buys are good. Got myself a little bag of goodies here, so I did not come away empty-handed. So kind of hard to see, but that was my phone screen showing the location of W1PJ, which is actually me. I have a little beacon on the vehicle, so if you look for W1PJ-9 on a certain website, you can see where I'm at all times. The beacon is hooked up to this little antenna that's on the roof of the car, goes through that little wire and into the back of the vehicle, of the VY2HF mobile. My beacon says W1PJ because that's my American call sign, and when I'm in the United States I like to use that one. But I'm also VY2HF, which is my Canadian call sign. And that map showing us at these coordinates brings us to the Mecca for all ham radio operators, which is Ham Radio Outlet. Ham Radio Outlet has stores all across the United States. This is the closest one to us in Atlantic Canada, so this is the one we come to every time we visit the Deerfield flea market. We always come down to Ham Radio Outlet to look around, not always to buy things. Oftentimes I walk out of there with nothing, but just looking around at the most recent modern radio equipment that's available. It's quite a treat to be able to browse these things for real, rather than just look at them over the internet or read about them in magazines. They have radios that are on display. They're powered up. You can actually operate these radios. They have antennas on top of the building which permit communications basically around the world using radios that are for sale. They have mostly new equipment, but there are some new used radios as well that are here on consignment. Plus they have lots of accessories like antennas, cabling, power supply, things, microphones, all kinds of stuff you need to have a successful amateur radio contact with whatever mode that you're thinking of using. So Ham Radio Outlet is just fantastic, and here in New Hampshire, of course, there's no sales tax. So of all of the ham radio outlets in the country, in the entire United States, this one is basically our favorite. A, because it's closest. B, because there's no sales tax here. So when you buy something, the price on the shelf is exactly what you pay when you get to the cash register, which is quite a treat to be in a state, New Hampshire, that has no sales tax. So Ham Radio Outlet is the place to be, and after this we're heading on to the flea market itself, which will be a treat as well. This could be a difficult day. Wow. Here we are, Deerfield. The Deerfield Fairgrounds in New Hampshire. It's a great spot. We decided to park up in the fairgrounds themselves this time rather than walk up from the parking lot downstairs, so we're down the hill. So we're going to walk around and see what we can see.
Just stepped away, but I just didn't. One screw missing. This one wouldn't screw. So like what? Black one? Black? No. Oh, 50 good. I do it on it's like all the commercial radio. Let them go. I'll give permission.
He cut you up there.
We'll see. I'll come back to our
Grab your phone chuck.
I didn't even know that was one.
$5 too much for you? See how things are. I don't want to take any of this stuff home. No. It's one of those things like a conversation piece. If it works, it works. If it doesn't,
I'm here. We're pros.
As you can see from some of the things on the tables, Deerfield has vintage equipment that's 60, 70, 80 years old, plus some fairly brand new equipment that someone just maybe bought a couple of years ago and now wants to move up and change that up to build and buy something else. So it's a very, very eclectic flea market. A lot of characters down here, a lot of nerds, and I'm one of those. But every year, every 6 months actually, it's always got a surprise or two. Glenn just found a nice little bunch of packages of small connectors and things that he really wanted badly, so he picked those up, and he also got a couple of stacks of free magazines that he's taking to the car right now. So we're doing pretty good, and we'll be here for another hour or two, and then we'll head back for Canada. But Deerfield's been a great event again this year. The rain was a little bit of a soggy thing yesterday, but although it's overcast and cloudy today, the rain really has held off, and there's quite a good crowd of people that are rolling in, so pretty optimistic that we'll see some cool stuff here before we have to leave.
These radios open up easy. Nice logos, huh?
Beautiful. Well, back from Deerfield, had a fantastic trip. Came down with a bit of a cold on the way there, and it just got worse as I got home. Pretty well over the cold now. But once again, I've been going to this thing for over 30 years now, off and on. Usually we go every spring and fall. It's fantastic. As you can see, there's been lots of old stuff out on the tables, and some of it's messy and some of it's really, really neat and tidy. There's some new equipment. Or visit the ham radio outlet, hung around with the boys, had a few pops, and ate some pizza both nights, I guess it was, in the hotel. It was a good drive back. It was a bit long. We leave there about 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock locally in the morning, around noontime. And I was home by 11:30 at night, and we were not hassled at all at the border. I had to pay money on the way across because I had quite a bit of stuff with me. Not all of it was mine. I had to pick up some parcels for some friends, and I had to go in and pay, but it was well worth the trip to do that. Got some cheap gas when we were down there. Got a few things at retail that you just can't get in Canada. So Hershey's chocolate, for instance, brought some of that home for a stash, and had just a wonderful trip. Can't wait to go back in the fall, and look forward to making arrangements to do that again. Deerfield, Nearfest, the New England Amateur Radio Festival in October 2019 is the next one. If you have any interest in gadgets and geeks, and you're anywhere within a couple of hours drive of southern New Hampshire, it's a great way to spend a Saturday.